We know that Justin Trudeau handed almost $1 billion to a charity that has paid multiple members of his family almost $300,000. We know that since Justin Trudeau became Prime Minister, the Trudeaus have appeared at, participated in, and financially benefited from dozens of WE events. Each time, they were given a platform to promote their personal brand and the Liberal Party policies. We know that WE employs a member of the Finance Minister's family and that it has close ties to the Liberal Party. We know that Minister Morneau accepted $41,000 in illegal travel expenses from WE for 2 luxury vacations in 2017. We know that WE has used these trips in the past to gain supporters and influence. We know that WE has acquired more than $40 million in prime Toronto real estate. Nous savons que WE avait des difficultés financières et que l'organisation a fait 2 propositions au gouvernement Trudeau pour avoir de l'aide. Nous savons que de nombreux ministres ont parlé avec les Kielburger avant l'octroi du contrat. Nous savons qu'aucune autre organisation n'a été sérieusement envisagée pour administrer la bourse canadienne pour le bénévolat étudiant. We know that despite all of the obvious conflicts of interest, Justin Trudeau and Bill Morneau failed to recuse themselves from the cabinet decision to hand their friends almost $1 billion of taxpayers' money. We know that the contract was given to a WE shell company for the organization's real estate holdings so that WE could avoid any legal liability. And we know that Justin Trudeau has repeatedly tried to use the pandemic to amass power for himself to reward his friends. These facts alone are disturbing enough, but perhaps even more so is what we still don't know. Est-ce que des ministres connaissaient les liens financiers entre la famille Trudeau, la famille Morneau et WE quand un contrat de près d'1 milliard de dollars a été accordé à l'organisation? Est-ce que d'autres ministres ou des membres de leur famille ont des liens financiers avec cette organisation? What contact did the Prime Minister or his office have with WE before awarding the contract? There are also questions about how the personal data collected by WE is handled and who has had access to it in the past. Who told WE about the announcement and what they would have to do to make their proposal fit the new parameters? Was anyone in the Prime Minister's office aware of WE's proposals or helping to advance them? Why was WE the only organization considered, especially when charity watchdogs have signaled they have had no experience delivering a program like this before? Has the Prime Minister or members of his family ever accepted free WE trips? Does the Prime Minister have any last-minute confessions he feels he needs to make before testifying at the Finance Committee? These are all questions Conservatives will be asking Justin Trudeau when he does testify. And if Justin Trudeau can't say no, then we must conclude that the answer must be yes. So where does that leave us? Le Premier ministre est sous enquête. Le ministre des Finances est sous enquête. 3 comités parlementaires font une enquête. Les conservateurs ont écrit à la GRC pour exiger une enquête criminelle. Et la vérificatrice générale et l'ombudsman de l'approvisionnement doivent aussi faire enquête. Now, Justin Trudeau and Bill Morneau would have us believe that a program designed to give $900 million to a Liberal-friendly organization just spontaneously appeared out of thin air. No one spoke to anyone, no one saw any documents, but all of a sudden a real estate shell company received a sole source contract and a boatload of cash. Or maybe we should say a villa load of cash. That's ridiculous, and no one believes them. Trudeau chose to give this contract, his political friends, $900 million worth of taxpayers' money during a global pandemic. Morneau chose to accept $41,000 worth of illegal travel expenses, just like he chose to only pay it back the day he was forced to testify. Now, normally, these would be fireable offenses. In the past, ministers have been forced to resign for much less. So why hasn't Bill Morneau been fired? And why haven't Liberal MPs demanded that Justin Trudeau step down as leader of the Liberal Party? This entire scandal reeks of corruption at the highest levels of government. Now, maybe Trudeau can't fire Morneau because he knows he's done much worse. But that doesn't mean that every single member of the Liberal caucus has to be painted with the same scandal-plagued brush. Les députés libéraux ont un choix à faire. Sont-ils prêts à sacrifier leur intégrité pour protéger un dirigeant sous enquête? Ou est-ce qu'ils vont prendre position et exiger que Trudeau parte? Si les libéraux refusent d'agir, s'ils restent sans rien faire, ils approuvent implicitement cette conduite corrompue et ils sont aussi coupables que Justin Trudeau. So Liberal MPs have a choice to make. Are they prepared to sacrifice their personal integrity to protect their scandal-plagued leader and to cover up corruption? Or are they willing to take a stand and demand that Trudeau step aside? If the Liberals refuse to act, if they sit on their hands and say nothing, then they are implicitly approving this corrupt behavior and they will be just as guilty as Justin Trudeau is. Thank you very much. Happy to take your questions.
Thank you. Merci. We will now take questions from the telephone lines. Nous allons maintenant prendre la période de questions. Veuillez appuyer sur étoile 1 si vous avez une question. Please press star 1 to ask a question. Our first question is from Hélène Bivetti avec Le Devoir. Please go ahead.
Oui, bonjour, Monsieur Scheer. Vous demandez la démission de à la fois Monsieur Morneau et Monsieur Trudeau, alors qu'on est en pleine pandémie. On a un déficit de 343 milliards. Il y a une crise économique qui pointe à l'horizon. Est-ce que c'est vraiment le bon moment, de se débarrasser à la fois du Premier ministre et de celui qui voit aux finances du pays?
Alors, c'est une situation très, très grave. Ça, c'est la raison pour laquelle ils doivent démissionner lorsque le gouvernement peut continuer de gérer notre pays pendant cette crise. Nous avons une situation où le Premier ministre a choisi d'utiliser une pandémie pour briser les lois, pour briser les règles et pour donner un contrat à ses amis. Ça, c'est la sorte de Premier ministre que nous avons à ce moment. Et nous avons besoin d'un Premier ministre qui respecte les règles, qui ne veut pas profiter politiquement d'une crise. So that is precisely the reason why these two individuals need to do the right thing and step aside for the good of the country. We are in an unprecedented crisis. We are facing a fiscal situation that is completely unprecedented. And we are facing the health consequences of the virus and the economic fallout. And that is precisely why these two individuals need to step aside, because they chose to use this pandemic as cover for their actions. And remember, the first thing Justin Trudeau did, the very first thing he did when he summoned Parliament back in March, he found the time to write a law that would give him unprecedented power and sideline the opposition and Parliament. That was his #1 priority. Now we find out why. We find out why he didn't want the opposition parties to be able to ask the tough questions, because this is the type of thing that he does. So it's precisely because of the crisis that we're facing that we need to remove these two individuals who are under this cloud of suspicion and allow the government to put Canadians first.
Mais réalistement, M. Scheer, vous dites effectivement on est en crise. Réalistement, si le Premier ministre du Canada et son ministre des Finances démissionnent, est-ce que ça ne va pas plutôt amplifier la crise et faire en sorte qu'on va être pris dans des considérations de qui les remplace plutôt que dans des considérations de gérer la pandémie?
Pas du tout. Nous avons des leaders du Parti libéral qui sont concentrés sur les buts politiques, pas sur la bienfaisance, pas sur les Canadiens. Alors ça c'est la réalité. Alors, nous avons besoin des chefs de gouvernement, de Premier ministre, ministre des Finances, qui peut concentrer sur leurs responsabilités et pas sur chercher entre leurs reçus pour déterminer le montant sur le chèque qu'il doit payer à notre organisation. Ça, c'est la réalité.
Thank you. Merci. Our next question, notre prochaine question, is from Teresa Wright with the Canadian Press. Please go ahead. À vous la parole.
Good morning, Mr. Scheer. I wonder if you can tell me if you think there should be stricter ethical screens built into the Prime Minister's office, regardless of who's in charge.
Well, you know, every time Liberals are in power, parliamentarians need to write stricter rules because they always find new ways to break them. We campaigned in the last election on imposing stricter penalties for politicians who are found guilty of breaking these types of laws. In the past, just being under investigation was enough for members of parliament to step aside, put their country ahead of their own ego and their own political careers, step aside to allow the work the government must continue to do to proceed without that cloud of suspicion. That was the common practice in our country and Commonwealth countries from around the world. At the very least, if ministers were found guilty of breaking rules, then they would do the right thing and resign, and prime ministers would hold them accountable. None of that has happened under Justin Trudeau, so that's why this conversation is turning to stricter penalties. And if I could just add to the previous question about whether or not changing ministers in a time of crisis would be the right thing to do. I believe it would. It would allow the government to move on past these scandals and focus on improving the lives of Canadians. But if we take a look at what Justin Trudeau and Bill Morneau's excuses are over the last few days, they're not responsible for anything. If you believe what they say, this wasn't their decision. They do whatever the department tells them to do. That they're not involved in any of the creation of these programs. They didn't have any conversations. They didn't pass documents back and forth. So if their excuse, if the reason why, if they're trying to hide behind the cover of they don't make any of these decisions anyway, then what would be the harm in them leaving their positions? So I don't buy their excuse. I also don't buy that removing them at this point would in any way hamper our efforts to fight the pandemic. In fact, it would improve it because we could ensure that we're focusing on getting better programs and results for Canadians.
And given that the summer is already half over, what do you think the government could or should do to try to help the students that were the intended recipients of the Canada Student Services Grant?
Well, you know, as a member of Parliament, every member of Parliament has dozens of organizations in their ridings who are undergoing a great deal of hardship right now because many people have not been able to donate. Many of the activities that they normally engage in they haven't been able to do. We've heard of summer camps having to close. We've heard of outreach activities that have had to be halted. There is a program that has already been designed that already has a delivery mechanism, that already has a department within the civil service administering a program. That is called the Canada Summer Jobs Program. And that is why we believe that rather than creating a brand new program that had never been tried before, rather than giving a $900 million contract to a real estate shell company, rather than giving this contract to a Liberal-friendly organization that had paid members of the Trudeau's immediate family and had given illegal gifts to the Minister of Finance, that it would have been much better off to flow that money through this existing program. I have organizations in my riding, as does every member of Parliament, who have been told no. They could not hire young people, that they could not place another person. They maybe applied for 4 spots, they were only given 1, or they were told they wouldn't be able to get any. By infusing that program with these dollars, we would have been able to say yes to those students looking to get that type of experience, yes to those organizations trying to remain afloat during the summer without having to go through the scandal and corruption that we've been seeing over the last few months.
Thank you. Merci. Our next question, notre prochaine question, is from Louis Bloin with Radio-Canada. Please go ahead. À vous la parole.
Bonjour, M. Scheer. Je voudrais savoir, est-ce que le Parti conservateur est prêt à faire tomber le gouvernement à la première occasion, si le contexte, bien sûr, s'y prête, si d'autres partis sont prêts à aller dans ce sens-là? Est-ce que le Parti conservateur est prêt à faire tomber le gouvernement sur cet enjeu-là?
Alors, nous ne parlons pas aujourd'hui des élections, nous parlons aujourd'hui d'un choix que les députés libéraux ont pour donner un signe aux Canadiens qu'ils prennent les éthiques sérieuses. Alors, ça, c'est le but de notre message. Il n'y a aucun mécanisme à ce moment pour forcer une élection. La Chambre ne siège pas. Il va prendre tous les partis d'opposition pour forcer cette décision. C'est clair que ça sera une décision à le prochain chef de notre parti s'il veut essayer quelque chose comme ça. Mais aujourd'hui, nous parlons seulement sur le choix des députés libéraux et le fait que Justin Trudeau doit témoigner la semaine prochaine et nous voulons les réponses à des questions que nous avons soulevées.
Vous avez soulevé l'idée du départ de M. Trudeau et de M. Morneau. Qui verriez-vous pour remplacer ces gens-là? Le Bloc québécois a parlé de Mme Freeland qui pourrait remplacer M. Trudeau. Est-ce que vous pensez que ce serait la meilleure chose à faire?
Ça sera une décision pour les députés libéraux. C'est clair qu'il y a deux camps. Il y a le groupe de Mme Freeland qui a défendre le Premier ministre. Il y a M. Champagne qui a dit qu'il n'y a aucune idée que cette proposition avait pris. Alors, c'est clair, il y a des choix pour les députés libéraux, mais je suis un député conservateur et je vais voter pour notre prochain chef, pas pour le prochain chef libéral.
Thank you. Merci. Our next question, notre prochaine question, is from Mélanie Marquet avec La Presse. Please go ahead. À vous la parole.
Bonjour, M. Scheer. Pour revenir sur la question de mon collègue, est-ce que je comprends bien que vous écartez la possibilité de travailler à faire tomber, à renverser le gouvernement au mois d'août parce que théoriquement, il y a 2 séances au mois d'août, donc il y aurait peut-être là une fenêtre d'opportunité?
Non, parce que les prochaines séances de la Chambre, c'est une séance de comité plénier. Il n'y a aucun mécanisme. Et comme j'ai dit, nous sommes concentrés aujourd'hui sur les questions que nous avons et les réponses que nous voulons. Ça, c'est notre priorité à ce moment.
Pourquoi demandez-vous aujourd'hui la démission de Justin Trudeau? Parce que le Bloc l'avait déjà fait. Pourquoi est-ce que vous le faites après le Bloc? Parce que dans l'affaire SNC, vous aviez été quand même assez rapide à demander la démission de M. Trudeau.
Oui, et j'ai jamais changé mon opinion. Je crois que Justin Trudeau ne mérite pas d'être Premier ministre de ce pays et j'ai la même opinion aujourd'hui. Mon message avant était que Justin Trudeau va clairement pas prendre responsabilité pour ses propres actions. Ça, c'est la raison pour laquelle je parle pas au Justin Trudeau, je demande pas qu'il démissionne lui-même, mais je parle aux députés libéraux. Ils ont un choix. Ils peuvent donner un signe aux Canadiens qu'ils n'acceptent pas les scandales comme ça. Il va avoir un niveau plus élevé pour leur chef. Ça, c'est un choix qu'il peut le faire aujourd'hui ou la semaine prochaine, mais nous avons eu les témoignages désastreux pour la réputation de Justin Trudeau. Alors, ça, c'est le message aujourd'hui. I called for Justin Trudeau's resignation when it became clear that he had interfered in an independent decision in the SNC-Lavalin scandal. And I've never changed my opinion. I don't believe he deserves to govern this country. His party received the most seats in the last election. He failed to receive the largest amount of votes, but he did receive the largest number of seats. So the Liberal Party of Canada has a right to govern this minority parliament for as long as they are able to find the support of at least one other party. But there is nothing written that says that must be Justin Trudeau. And members of his caucus have a choice to make. They can send a signal to Canadians that they do not accept this type of corruption. They do not accept this type of behavior. And freeing themselves of someone like Justin Trudeau, who cannot hold Bill Morneau to a higher standard than himself, may allow that party to rehabilitate its very tarnished image.
Thank you. Merci. Our next question, notre prochaine question, is from Cormac McSweeney with CTV News. Please go ahead. À vous la parole.
Yes, Mr. Scheer, you're calling for resignations. You've asked for criminal investigations. There's an ethics commissioner investigation underway as well as committees, but you're showing no signs at this point of being willing to take down the government over this scandal. So we don't have all the answers yet or the full story. So after this, when we get more details about this controversy, what other recourses do you have that you haven't already called for?
Well, you rightly point out that there are examples in the past of the Liberals not cooperating with Parliament, and that there are limited tools available to the opposition parties. First and foremost, I just have to point out that there is really no mechanism to force an election. The House of Commons will not be sitting again until well into September. So this is a theoretical possibility that's really not for me to comment on, given the leadership race that we're undergoing ourselves. But it's important to use this opportunity to signal, because you asked the question about what more can we do. What we saw in the last investigation into Justin Trudeau's ethical lapses was a Prime Minister that refused to cooperate. The Ethics Commissioner spelled out the fact that not all cabinet confidences were waived. There were at least 9 witnesses who indicated that they were only able to provide partial testimony because of the restrictions around that. So we are calling on Justin Trudeau to lift all cabinet confidences, to provide all relative information. Do not hide behind these types of things to protect this behavior. We are going to continue to do everything we can at our disposal. You know, this is one of the outcomes of Justin Trudeau shutting down Parliament for the last few months, is that we have not been able to use order paper questions, opposition day motions, and things like that. So we are going to continue to do everything we can to expose the scandal and to get all the details out in front of the Canadian people so that they can make the ultimate determination.
And my follow-up is on a separate issue, but also stemming from allegations. There's an independent probe now that's being launched by the Privy Council office. They're looking into getting a third party to investigate the harassment and verbal abuse allegations against Governor General Julie Payette. Do you think that Julie Payette should step aside from her role as Governor General given the serious allegations against her, or do you think the Prime Minister should replace her in her role?
Well, first of all, I will say that I believe that every employee has a right to work in a harassment-free environment, and it's important that no matter where you work, private sector, public sector, any level of government, that everyone strives very hard to make sure that that is the case. I won't have any comments specifically on some of these allegations, as it looks like there will be that type of inquiry going on. But I will say that if we are talking about looking into allegations of this type of behavior at the highest levels, in some of those levels where it's difficult to get to the bottom of because they are the highest positions in the land, I do hope some attention will be turned to the allegations of this type of behavior coming in the Prime Minister's office. Perhaps this inquiry can be expanded, and they can talk to Ms. Cesar Chavez, who indicated that she received very intimidating types of phone calls from, or conversations from, Justin Trudeau. We can perhaps talk to Jane Philpott and find out why she was fired just for standing up against his past corruption scandals. And perhaps we can talk to the civil servants who were disciplined after complaining about the way Justin Trudeau handled his blackface scandal. So if we are going to look at this type of harassment and bullying types of behavior, I just hope it's comprehensive.
Thank you. Merci. Once again, please press star 1 if you would like to ask a question. Veuillez appuyer sur étoile 1 si vous voulez poser une question. Our next question is from Andrew Lawton with True North. Please go ahead. À vous la parole.
Good morning, Mr. Scheer. You've spoken about, obviously, the lack of teeth in the ethics probes that we have for Canadian lawmakers. You've also spoken about resignations here. Regarding an RCMP investigation, what would you like to see come out of that? I know your finance critic, Pierre Poilievre, has spoken about it. You've talked about this in the past as well. What charges do you think really need to be explored here?
Well, I think it's very important for me to indicate that we have called for the RCMP investigation, but of course we don't want to prejudge what types of conclusions they may come to. We've identified several sections of the criminal code that we believe very clearly would apply to this situation. We also believe that more needs to come out. We know that this organization, was not registered to lobby. But it seems like, at least in several instances, there were phone calls back and forth from the Prime Minister's office, other departments, and of course, the trips provided to Bill Morneau. We've got rules for members of Parliament about whether or not they can accept a lunch, working lunch or not, and yet Bill Morneau thought it was okay to take a luxurious vacation. So luxurious, in fact, that he forgot about $41,000 worth of fine wine and fine dining. So we do believe that now's the time to look at some of these things. We want the RCMP to investigate. We want the lobbying commissioner to investigate. There were allegations at committee about what we does with the data collected and who it provides that to. We need clarity on that. We need to get to the bottom of that. And if there is more to substantiate those allegations, obviously we'll have more to say about that as it relates to the elections commissioner as well.
The federal court has found that Canada's Safe Third Country Agreement with the United States contravenes the Charter. This is, of course, the agreement that has been resulting in so much illegal immigration at Roxham Road and elsewhere in Canada. Do you have any comments on this decision?
Well, this is a decision that obviously will have a massive impact on Canada's immigration and refugee system. We've seen the number of illegal immigrants, illegal border crossers coming into Canada continue even during this pandemic. We have long called for changes made to that regime to allow Canada to preserve the integrity of our borders. We believe that the government must explore every option to make sure that we're able to do that. So that's what we'll be pressing for, and of course the next leader of the party will no doubt have more to say on those types of things, those types of policies.
Thank you. Merci. Our next question, notre prochaine question, is from Evan Dwyer with CBC News. Please go ahead. À vous la parole.
Good morning, Mr. Scheer. As you said, Parliament won't be back until September, but however, that's not really that far away. We're talking about 8 weeks, so or not even. So, would you consider at that point, perhaps, trying to bring down the government? And have you talked with other parties about the possibility of uniting against this government?
So as I said, since I won't be the leader of the party at that time, I don't think it would be appropriate for me to comment on what may or may not be the strategy later on. I can tell you that in our conversations with the other parties, I have, that has not come up. We're focusing on getting to the bottom of the scandal. We're focusing on making sure that the committees that are undergoing these types of investigations can continue to do their work. Remember, in the last Parliament, when the Liberals had the majority, they shut down these investigations. They famously shut down the Justice Committee before we heard all the testimony, before we got to the bottom of the SNC-Lavalin scandal. In this Parliament, the opposition parties can prevent that from happening, and that's what our conversations have been focused on.
And you referred to the We Charity Foundation, which received this contribution agreement as a real estate holding company. And I want to ask you about that, because the We Charity has put out statements denying that this foundation held any real estate at any time. It has acknowledged they created it to avoid legal liability, but they've denied any real estate holdings. Do you know anything that contradicts that claim?
Well, the initial reports came out that, well, whether or not this company actually held any real estate, that was the purpose of its creation. I have never seen, I'm not aware of organizations, a charity that has this many layers and this many different types of affiliated enterprises, so it's hard to keep track of sometimes which is the group that actually holds these events, which is the group that makes money, what's the for-profit side, what's the real estate side. It is very difficult to follow through all the different layers that they've built here. But again, I just reiterate the fact that they have signaled that they chose a shell company to receive the grant to protect we from any legal liability. It seems like nobody in the Prime Minister's office or the Finance Minister's office was worrying about protecting taxpayers and the liability on taxpayers and making sure that young people got the benefits that they were told they were going to get. So again, this is an example of the need for these types of investigations.
Thank you. We have no further questions registered at this time. Nous n'avons plus de questions pour le moment.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
The conference has now ended. Please disconnect your lines at this time. We thank you for your participation. La conférence est maintenant terminée. Vous pouvez maintenant déconnecter vos lignes. Nous vous remercions de votre participation.